The Plutarchan hero. Plutarch's fundamental sensibilities are aristocratic, and his perspective naturally colors his attitude towards his heroes. Consequently, high birth counts to their credit, as does the martial valor that aristocrats in Greece as well as Rome never cease to admire. Indeed, even if Plutarch plainly prefers peace to war, it remains the case that most of his heroes are lethal warriors. As statesman, he expects them to guide and care for the masses, but not to pay heed to their shifting and mercurial moods, except to take whatever measures are needed for their conciliation and persuasion, although this should never come at the cost of irresponsible policies. For Plutarch, demagogy is always a vice. Plutarch's moralism draws on Platonic and Aristotelian ethics in conventional ways that could hardly surprise or offend his contemporaries, and so his heroes, when at their best, display courage and patriotism, are industrious and generous, and rely on intelligence and reason. They are truthful and honest in every transaction, and are consistently indifferent to wealth, luxury, or sensuality. They are good family men. In politics, they are committed to justice and to freedom, even if they are kings. Plutarch especially prizes the virtue of gentleness or moderation, which, far from making a man weak, affords him the strength to exhibit justice and mercy. Gentleness or moderation furnishes self-restraint and leaves its possessor unaffected by injury or jealousy or the debilitating vice of anger. Another quality esteemed by Plutarch, not unconnected with moderation, is philanthropia, that is, a sense of humane civilization, which in his view is essential for attaining moral perfection. Plutarch's idea of a humane civilization is a specific one, and although an inclination to philanthropia can occur naturally, as it does in the case of Marcellus, to flourish properly, it requires the presence of Greek high culture and a philosophical Greek education. This, for Plutarch, is a vital matter. No amount of natural talent can compensate for the absence of a properly philosophical education. Indeed, men endowed with marvelous capacities are often those at the greatest risk of veering into ethical failure if they lack the moral training required for curbing the force of their emotions and ambitions. Such is the case for Coriolanus, whose great nature remains untempered by philosophy for the simple, if regrettable, reason that a thorough Greek education, paideia, was impossible for any Roman in his day. And so, Greek education for Plutarch is almost the sine qua non of the perfect man, and its absence constitutes Plutarch's readiness to diagnose whenever any of his heroes, Roman or Greek, proves deficient. It is clear then that although the subjects of Plutarch's lives derive from different cultures and nearly always exist in different times and places, they nevertheless inhabit the same moral universe as they enact the same virtues or vices, and the criteria defining that moral universe are Greek ones. This in no way excludes Romans from the attainment of moral perfection, but it does require them to embrace the values of Greek civilization, which for Plutarch was an important part of the rise of Rome. Although Numa, allegedly a pupil of Pythagoras, was a suitably learned man, an appreciation for Greek high culture came to Rome only with Marcellus, and was welcomed by the Romans only gradually after that, a development unfolded in the lives included in this volume and culminating in Aemilius Paulus, who was, according to Plutarch, an authentic Philhellenine. For all its concentration on the nature and virtue, however, the parallel lines attracts readers owing to the excitement, drama, and charm of its stories, those superficial enactments of virtue, and nevertheless rivet our attention and provoke our judgment. Our inclination to make our own assessment of Plutarch's heroes is stimulated by the comparison that concludes each pairing. These are the heroes which are pitted against one another. The comparison set next to the complexities of the twinned lives seem unsophisticated, and it is odd how they sometimes include information not mentioned in the relevant life, or sometimes view previously narrated events in a drastically different way. Even their Greek, while not without flourishes, is in a different and less ambitious register than the biographies they conclude. These particularities once led scholars to doubt their Plutarchan authorship, an extreme view that has long been abandoned. Nonetheless, the comparisons continue to perplex critics who cannot agree on why it is Plutarch who elected to find closure for his pairings in this remarkable device. One view is that Plutarch intended, through the inconsistencies and want of sophistication that mar the comparisons, to bring to the fore the impediments that hamper simple moral judgments. Another approach prefers to take the comparisons at face value. After the lives have investigated the essential quality of the virtue manifested in the pairing, the comparisons urge the reader to try to decide which of Plutarch's protagonists was in fact the better man. Whatever one's take on the comparisons, however, it is obvious how, unlike the parallelism that structures the twin biographies, their emphasis on contrast signals the potential for rivalry even between very similar Romans and Greeks. Greek and Roman in the imperial age. What did it mean to be a Greek in imperial Rome? And what was the role of Greek culture in a world dominated by Roman power? By Plutarch's day, as his own career demonstrates, Greece and Rome were hardly separate worlds. This was obviously true politically, as Plutarch more than once reminds his readers in his advice on public life. But it was also the case that in cultural terms there was no strict divide. Elite Romans had long immersed themselves in Greek high culture, and not even Juvenal's rant about the Orontes flowing into the Tiber can decisively distract anyone from the humane world of Plutarch's table talk, which discloses a cosmopolitan society of Romans and Greeks, bound together by their common devotion to Greek literature and Hellenic values. And on the other side of the equation, even the staunchest proponent of Hellenism had to concede that nowadays nearly everyone uses some Latin. Some Greeks went further than that. By Plutarch's day, the Roman Senate included Greek aristocrats, not all of whom are obvious to modern scholars, because at least some of them preferred in Roman public life to use their Roman names instead of their Greek ones. These men were Roman citizens, spoke Latin as well as Greek, and carried out their duties for the greater glory of Rome. Although specific figures are elusive, Plutarch regards it as an uncontroversial observation that senatorial ambitions pervade the Greek high society of his day. It has been suggested that Saucius Senecio, the dedicatee of the parallel lives, originated in the Greek East. A splendid illustration of this Greco-Roman complexity is Julius Celsus, a contemporary of Plutarch. A native of Asia Minor, Celsus was a tribune of the soldiers in a Roman legion, and then a senator and finally consul in CE 92. He later held the lofty position of proconsul of Asia. His distinguished career was memorialized by his son, himself consul in CE 110, in the famous library of Celsus in Ephesus. There, Celsus's service to the empire was recorded in both Greek and Latin inscriptions, and statues of Celsus exhibited him in his Roman offices. At the same time, Celsus's monument was a Greek library, and his personal qualities represented in the building's ornamentation were expressed as Greek virtues. Celsus's library, like the parallels lives, raises more questions than it answers. Does it symbolize cultural unity, or is it a hybridism in its most conspicuous feature, and therefore its most significant message? It was once natural to view Plutarch's age as a time when, as Gibbon put it, that, quote, the nations of the empire insensibly melted away into the Roman name and people, end quote. The parallel lives were adduced as evidence of this conciliatory spirit by Ronald Syme, who observed how they, quote, proclaimed the harmony and parity of the two peoples in a sequence of historical biographies, Roman worthies paralleled with Greek, end quote. Such views, however, fail to account for the predominantly Greek atmosphere of Plutarch's literary project, in which Roman history has been appropriated as a part of Hellenic culture, to the extent that Plutarch can claim of Rome, in response to the elder Cato's hostility towards Hellenic values, that, quote, in the age when the city rose to the zenith of her greatness, her people had made themselves familiar with Greek learning and culture in all its forms, end quote. The moral universe of the parallel lives, as we have seen, is a Greek one, in which Romans must find their fit if they are to arrive at true virtue. From this perspective, it is now commonly asserted the parallel lives has little to do with harmony or reconciliation, but is instead a statement of cultural resistance in response to Roman power. That, too, may be a bit reductive. Matters remain untidy in the parallel lives, not least because Plutarch exhibits a somewhat paradoxical response to the Roman Empire. On the one hand, it reflects a divine providence. On the other, it brought an end to the real Greek freedom, a reality which Plutarch plainly regrets, even if he accepts it. Plutarch comes back to his concern about this more than once, especially in this volume in his Philopemian Flaminius, a pairing which centers around issues of power, liberation, and lost independence. And slow Plutarch, a royal and dutiful citizen of Rome, remains its critical and independent subject. Plutarch's independence, however, is hardly a hostile or antagonistic reflex. His characteristic generosity and fairness are lavished on his Roman as well as his Greek heroes, and it is important that in the world of the parallel lives it is often the Roman who excels the Greek in a particular virtue. Men like Claudius Marcellus, Titus Quintius Flaminius, and Aemilius Paulus win his deep admiration, even as they bring Roman legions into places once governed by Greeks. If all this seems a bit untidy, it must be remembered that Plutarch's was an age in which controversies over cultural identity and the correct response to Roman authority were topical and unsettled matters. It should not surprise us to find Plutarch investigating these issues in a manner too thoughtful to lend itself to a simple or easy formulation.